We have a Prime Minister in this country, of course, but we don't have a leader. I've detailed the gradual diminution of Anthony Albanese since his election. His failures took a while to build momentum, but then his abysmal failures started to mount. And voters are increasingly realising that he's not up to the job. He started kowtowing to China, he mangled the voice, he's spent wildly fuelling inflation and keeping interest rates higher for longer. He's doubled down on his national energy self-harm, he's given more power to the unions, and he's been pathetic and divisive on Israel and anti-Semitism. On this program, I've asked the pointed question, what is the point of Albo? What on earth is he even attempting to do? And I've pointed out that he never takes responsibility for anything, always ducks responsibility. So it was true to form, I guess, when he turned up at the Synagogue in suburban Melbourne today, more than 4 days after it was firebombed. It was the day after the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, had been there. Just as Albo called it a terrorist attack only after the opposition did, and just like Albo established a special police task force on anti-Semitism only after the opposition announced it would do so. Albo is not a leader, he's a follower. Anyway, he eventually turned up at the scene today.
This arson attack is an act of terrorism. It was fuelled by anti-Semitism and it was stoked by hatred. We're a country that needs to come together and unite.
Yeah, Labor knows the word unite, but it's not been good at fostering unity. Just listen to some of the crowd as Albanese refuses to take any questions before leaving the synagogue.
Are you worried about the community?
Move back, guys.
Move back. Are you worried to take questions? Yesterday was the first time.
Yeah, you're late and you let this happen, buddy. Not the response the Prime Minister wanted, but hardly unexpected. This manifestation of hatred has torn apart that community and it's horrified the nation since last Friday morning. And only now did the Prime Minister turn up. This performance has become typical of Albanese. We all know how he had time for tennis in Perth on Saturday when he could have been heading to Melbourne. And this only reminds us, of course, of how last year, during the ongoing crime crisis in Alice Springs, Albanese eventually visited the territory town for a few hours, but he'd spent many hours, over 3 days, taking in the Australian Open tennis in Melbourne. No Prime Minister can be in more than one place at once, but they do have to juggle priorities daily. And Albanese promised something very different to what he's delivered.
Never before has Australia had a Prime Minister with such a pathological determination to avoid responsibility. He declares, it's not my job, it's not a race, it's a matter for the states. He doesn't hold a hose and he doesn't give a rat's. Every action, every decision has to be dragged out of him. And so often, after all of the build-up, he gets it wrong anyway. And it's always, always too little and always too late.
Just a reminder, he was talking about Scott Morrison there. Albo wasn't talking about himself, but he could just as well have been, couldn't he? Albo doesn't really know how to lead, does he? He doesn't know which issues or which events require the authority and the imprimatur of the Prime Ministership, or in what way. The Australian Jewish community's suffering over the past 14 months simply hasn't been a high enough priority for Albanese. It's a situation that's demanded strong leadership, showing the community what will not be tolerated, providing a lead to law enforcement agencies and delivering unity through strength, emphasising national values. This stuff just isn't in Albo's DNA. He's not a leader, he's a protester. Remember, he said he likes to fight Tories, for crying out loud. In fact, as a young bloke, he used to be in those protesting mobs, shouting aggressive slogans against Israel. Now he doesn't know what to do. Since the day after the October 7 atrocities in Israel last year, we've seen hatred on our streets, anti-Semitism raising its ugly head, and Labor and Albanese have done next to nothing. And Albanese Labor's constant criticism of Israel has only encouraged the haters. Foreign Minister Penny Wong has been at it again, defending her criticism of Israel.
We expect Russia to abide by international law and end its illegal and full-scale war on Ukraine. We expect China to abide by international legal decisions in the South China Sea. We expect Israel to abide by international law.
This is a terrible argument for all sorts of reasons. Let's start by asking how often Wong and Albanese slam China over its constant breaches of international law. They spend their days grovelling to Beijing. Remember, Albanese once delayed talking about a sonar attack on our sailors so he didn't embarrass China. And what about Russia? How much energy do Wong and Albanese put into criticising Russia? Russia and China subvert the international rules-based order daily, and Wong and Albanese spend more time criticising Israel. In fact, Labor has broken with the United States and sided with Russia and with China against Israel. And which international laws do Wong and Albanese want Israel to abide by? They've called for Israel to leave the occupied territories. But they must know that Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. So after nearly 2 decades without Israeli occupation and receiving tens of billions of dollars of foreign aid, what did Hamas do with all that? How did that work out for Israel? Deal in reality, please. And if Wong's going to speak about international law, why isn't she highlighting the war crime of taking hostages? Men, women and children, even babies, taken as hostages by Hamas, still held in Gaza more than 430 days on, a war crime repeated every day, and instead of demanding Hamas abide by the law, abide by common decency, Wong throws her lot in with the clearly politicised and compromised version of international law that the United Nations types like to cite against Israel. Look, our government has shamed our nation with its stand on the Middle East, and it's imperilled our citizens and our society by the hatred it has allowed to fester. It's done far too little, way too late, to stem this tide of Jew hatred and quell the Islamist extremist hatred. It's dividing our country like never before. And Albo doesn't know what to do or say because he's preoccupied with politics over conviction.